godliness, and I do believe that was a criticism on you.
On me?
I may have thrown you under the bus. So. That's okay.
We're late.
I'm down with that. We have lots going on.
Anticipation. We're making
Are we live on both?
Yep, we're good to go live.
Okay. Starting live video.
The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, was if you're going to be asking questions, I wanted to find out how we're going to interject that when we are actually just doing our freestyle discussion. Are you just going to be okay with just interjecting questions every now and again, or are you wanting to have that structured? I'm going to ask this question, and you're going to let us talk and just go wild, and then you're going to bring it to the next question? I guess, do you feel comfortable with knowing when and how you're going to do that with the questions that you have prepared?
Yeah.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Keep up. If we start getting off track, is when I will.
Bring us
I'm
back.
just gonna keep you all on track.
A control chaos.
Sis, did you go live on there?
Yep, right now.
I'm on the page. Is anybody else able to view the live on the discussion?
I can see.
You can see? I'll probably help. I see it. We're good. All right, we're good for both. So, first thing I was thinking is that let's just go around and introduce ourselves. We can look at the camera or not, but you know, not everyone knows each other. I know we have some just viewers here, some people who may speak, may not speak, but I'll go ahead and start it off. I'm Jayton Simpson. Just a Missoula family guy trying to do all I can to make a better community, not only for myself, but of course, primarily for the next generation, for my kids, for my friends' kids. And I'm just trying to prioritize this because this impacts me, I feel, more than other things that I could support. Not trying to downplay that other things like just pure systematic, injustice or rape culture or anything like that. There's definitely lots to go around where we can help, but this right here, it means a lot to me. And this is my part of stepping up, raising my hand and saying I'm willing to do whatever I can to help out and improve our community and improve our country. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamar Galbraith with Pond, Montana. I'm mostly here just to facilitate and hope to be a part of this awesome discussion.
I'm Brian Van Meter. Recently moved to Missoula from California about 2 months ago. I work with Jayton, and he invited me to come out so that I join and looking to become more part of the community, being new and looking at ways to do that. And so that'd be a great opportunity.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, thank you. My name's Eden Roberts, and I am here I'm trying to work very hard to improve myself and also the community I live in and just the world. And so being a part of healthy dialogue that is focused on understanding other people's perspectives, I think will contribute to just making the world we live in a better place. And so I'm fortunate to be able to do this with these folks here, and I'm hoping to maybe just be a part of something greater.
My name is Richard Buckup Thunder, and I'm here to kind of help my community. I'm kind of a private person, so doing things like this is a way for me to get out of my shell and also be a positive to my community as opposed to just kind of staying in the shadows and not doing anything, I guess. My name's Nathan Franklin. I've been a part of Missoula for many years, but just recently moved to North Dakota, so made the trip back here just to be a part of this. I find that being a part of something like this is important enough to make a long trip, such as the one I just made. And the reason why I'm a part of this is because I feel like it's the first step in walking the walk as opposed to just talking the talk. A lot of people have opinions, and most people are open to sharing their opinions, but I don't think we see enough action today. So this is just the first of hopefully many steps in making some kind of change in the world.
Hi, Lorianne Sosek. I'm a Missoula native. I'm a mom, and I just really think it's important to engage. to disagree and to just explore. And I think it helps us dig further into how we really feel about things and understanding ourselves further, so that as we move forward, we really know where it is we're going with how we, what we want to do. And having conversations with people like this, I feel like it just helps us all kind of understand more, even our own selves, and how we want to help and what we want to do, and just engagement, I think, is important. So here I am.
Well, with that said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Jamar, let him break the ice with things, and then we'll get into it.
Cool. All right, thank you. So just I want to go over a few agreements with the group. First is just to pay attention to the amount of space that you take up during a conversation. If you typically fill a lot of space, then be mindful of that, and be sure to take a step back and do some reflecting and allow others to fill space as well. And if you're a type that typically doesn't fill up space, be mindful of that as well. You're here, your opinion is really valued, and we would love to hear that. I also wanted to have an agreement around just allowing the group to decide how much time per person. And we'll just honor that agreement by hoping that I don't have to step in and start moderating. I think that that free discussion is really important to these sort of things, and these are conversations that don't get had publicly very often. I'm definitely honoring the fact that that this is a work in progress, and honoring and respecting those efforts. Also, another agreement around just allowing some quiet time between speakers. If there's something that's sort of sitting on you, you need to think about it a little bit, feel free to take that time to reflect. If you don't have an answer for something right away, then that's okay. Take some time to internalize, think about those messages, and then move forward from there. I'll handle it if anyone seems to be violating an agreement. Feel free to let me handle those sort of things. I don't want this group process sort of undermined by worrying about structure or anything like that. Respecting and valuing others' opinions. We just might hear some things that we disagree with today, and that's okay. That's part of having the conversation, but it's okay to have disagreements respectfully. So no attacks there. And then the final agreement is just to share thoughts and feelings for yourselves. If you're having any anecdotes or something like that, let's just leave out any identifying factors for people that are part of our stories, because they're part of our lives, but they don't need to have their information or anything like that broadcasted.
Good call out.
How's that sound?
Great.
Good. Agreed.
Cool. So I understand that you all watched a video around privilege. You want to talk a little bit about that video, what we saw?
Before we get into that, I think that what we wanted to do as a group first was establish. Well, first we wanted to talk about empathy first. Are we still on path with that first?
That's fun. Mm-hmm.
And then also establishing how leading with empathy in daily interactions with our friends, our family, and also with people who we do not know. Mm-hmm. So I do want to hopefully, and then also to let everyone know the stance that we have on empathy as a group. I mean, that's one of the ways that we all have come together as I would say, sort of like-minded people, that we can all stand behind empathy and know how valuable that is when we carry that with us and have that ready to, for analogy's sake, have that bucket of empathy and be ready to pull out of that at any given time, as opposed to the hate or anything negative bucket on the other side. So does anybody, because I know that we've had some time now to come up with things on that we wanted to address with empathy. Does anybody else want to go first as we establish? And this is from a group point of view. And then we can, of course, through that, we can talk about our personal experience. I also want to talk about things that we can share to others as well, and how we handle situations with empathy, again, with ourselves, with others, so other people can understand if they have not, or they can have that opportunity to go, oh wow, I had that chance, I should have used empathy there, or raising that awareness that we can pull from that.
So why don't we all get on the same page, because language is really important and what we call things is important as well. So why don't we get each other's definitions of empathy? How do you define empathy personally? We'll go. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think that's important that we do understand. And my understanding of empathy is the old school sympathy versus empathy. Right? You sympathize from over here, you empathize from right here. And so I still have that old school definition in my mind when I think of empathy. I'm gonna, and not here with sympathy, but right here with empathy.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that empathy is, a lot of times I think of the term perspective taking, and it is taking the perspective of another person and really trying to be there. When I was reading different definitions of empathy, the German translation of empathy means feeling into. And I thought that was incredibly powerful. Feeling into the experience of another person and actually being in it. And I sat in that and thought about it, and I think that's the most accurate definition that I found.
You know, it's very interesting you say the definition of empathy from the German perspective. I mean, because how many times have we said, oh, from this Latin translation of this or this English translation of this? I mean, all those things are perspectives and ways of which somebody else has defined something.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just clicked for me right now, understanding that. Like you brought that up, and that was the most powerful in the way you related to it the most. Sorry, I just wanted to share that. That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think the explanation of empathy needs to be broadened and more than just its, especially the American definition, because the American definition is the ability to understand and or share the feelings of someone else's experience. But I think what's important to note is the words understand and share. When you're empathizing with someone, you don't actually understand their feelings or experiences if you haven't experienced them directly. I'm not you, so I will never truly understand what it is that you've gone through in any particular example. But I can consider it. I can create a scenario in which I'm involved in there and how I would react to it. But that doesn't mean I will always understand what your feelings might be. And so I think empathy is more than just the Webster's Dictionary explanation of just understanding, because I don't think you can actually do that in many cases. So to me, empathy is more about considering someone else's point of view, applying that to your own personality, and then making a judgment or making a move beyond that. And so
so wouldn't we continue to just dissect these words down to the definition in which it is? Because,
well, no, I just brought up the actual definition.
and I'm looking at it right now as well. I understand
Yeah.
what you're saying, but when you say, well, I don't think anybody can really understand what somebody is going through because I have not experienced exactly what you've gone through.
I mean, on a very basic level, you know, you could say, you know, I broke my toe.
Mhm.
Oh, I've broken my toe before. That's sympathizing, really, is what that is. So I understand what you're going through. I understand pain. I've had broken bones. I've been inconvenienced. You know, I can understand, but I got pulled over for driving while black. Oh, I understand. No, I don't. No, I don't understand what that means. I can't empathize. By the literal definition, I can't empathize. I can imagine what it would like to be pulled over for something I have no control of. That would be infuriating. I can imagine that would be dehumanizing and humiliating and all the things like that. And I've experienced things similar to that. So
You start to understand.
I can have a good idea, but I don't understand what it means to be pulled over while driving while black.
So let's hear a few more. I think a few other folks haven't given their definitions of empathy before we get too sidetracked. You got a couple more definitions of empathy?
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, I just think of empathy in like a very simple, like the saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's just simply, you may not, like if you may not have ever been pulled over for driving while black, but like you said, you can understand like some other type of injustice. And by simply just trying to understand that injustice, you are empathizing for them.
Mm-hmm.
It may not completely 100%, you can't be like, okay, I'm not black, so I can never understand what it's like to be black. It doesn't need to be 100%.
Sure.
But just taking that step and understanding is empathy.
Yeah.
And that is very important because a lot of people don't just take that simple step of like, okay, well, why is he so mad if he was pulled over, not, speeding, not driving erratically, just simply someone sees him black driving in a really nice neighborhood, or some other example. Just taking that simple fact of I'm going to try to understand why you're so upset is a lot of that does not happen a lot. At least I don't think it always happens.
I don't think the definition itself is incorrect. I think, especially for our purposes here today, it just needed to be expanded on a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah. So I agree with what you were saying about understanding, and kind of what I think about is being open to trying to understand. It's more making yourself, I don't want to say vulnerable, but kind of trying to pick yourself in the other person's shoes, or trying to think of what it would be like, because you will never completely understand, and there's things that I'll never understand, but being empathizing means you're willing to take that step to try to. And so that's kind of resonated when you said about the that extra level, is I think that, when I think about empathizing, it's not, I'm understanding this. It's no, I'm making myself available to try to understand, learning the person's perspective and getting that information.
Recognizing that there's a different reality. I think that there's a difference between the definition of empathy and the goal of empathy.
That's what I was just going to touch on, Ian, is that I feel like we almost need, excuse me, a bigger word. Like we need empathy 2.0. Or, it's like something that we are trying to get to. But yeah, if you look at just the black and white definition of empathy, we are thinking on a broader term, I think, as a whole. And it's the closest word we could come to what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's 100% accurate. But I think it's pretty close.
Yeah.
But the word empathy is limiting, I think, a little bit.
A little bit. And I think that's just the beauty of all of this, is that we have all stepped up and said, I am going to have empathy when I have any and every type of interaction, especially when there's sensitive, when there's a sensitive topic or a sensitive situation, awkward situation, whatever that may be. And we can, carve it up 50 million different ways, but like you said, we can have just the definition of it, but what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with empathy now that you know the definition? And I just feel that that's what we are trying to do as we go forward with this, not only these discussions, but as we live life. Like all those definitions, everything. I mean, whether we fully understand it or not, but I'm trying,
That's it. Empathy is the tool that we should use to get to our bigger goal. And I think the goal of this group, if we had to put it in one sentence, is healthy dialogue amongst people with different beliefs. If we believe differently, we have different experiences, we have different realities. Can I respect, attempt to understand, but respect the fact that your world and your experience is different from mine? That's fundamental human respect, and that's what I think we use empathy in the pursuit of.
That was a great discussion. Thanks, sir. So thanks for sharing your definitions on empathy. And one of the things that is coming up is that language is limiting. The language is also powerful. And so one of the things that I was hearing often was what empathy is not. Empathy is not sympathy. It's a deeper level of that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts as a group on the differences between empathy and sympathy.
I guess I'll go back to what I touched on before. Sympathy for me is really standing over here, looking at something else, and from a distance saying, oh, that sucks for you. And empathy is taking that effort and walking over and standing there with that person. And you might not at that point still understand how deeply it sucks, but you're getting closer.
So is it wrong to have, or and maybe this is going to come up later or something, but I do want to. Yeah, no, I'll save it for later. Go ahead, Nate. We're going that way.
I think in a lot of cases, people will lean towards sympathy when they're trying to interact with another person. And I think a lot of times, without knowing it, sympathy is often the wrong angle to take when you're speaking with someone. Someone's having a hard time, and your immediate instinct is to sympathize with them. But what's wrong about that in some cases is that you are now turning the focus in on yourself. When this person's having a hard time, when they're going to say they lost a family member, and your first thought is to say, I lost a family member too. Well, it's not about you. In this moment, it's not about you. It's about this person who has just recently lost a family member. So in order to be a better person in that moment, you want to empathize, which is to reach out your shoulder and say, that is hard. And I can't imagine what you're feeling right now. And I won't try to tell you how to feel, but I'm here. And that's really it. Empathy is a very simple thing to do, or empathizing is a very simple thing to do if you stick to the basics, because it's very easy to overcomplicate empathy. And when you do, it will start to leak into sympathy. And I think oftentimes that line is blurred and maybe misunderstood by people involuntarily. I think most people who sympathize when the situation doesn't call for it are doing it with the best intentions, but maybe we just don't understand because we haven't given it much thought that when you are sympathizing, what you really should be doing or would rather be doing because it would yield better results is empathizing.
I kind of agree with everything you guys said. Like, to me, empathy is that taking the action, and sympathizing is just like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry your mom died, or using your example, empathy is actually going over and trying to help the person through the process, through the grief.
No.
In that example, it's just the way sympathy is lip service. Empathy is actually doing something.
I like that, lip service.
But yeah.
I think the difference between the two is, I think it's psychological distance. I think that sympathy, you stay away from the person. Empathy, you get in there with them, and that can be protective. Maybe you are not in a position in your life for whatever reason to get into that moment with the person and feel that. Empathy, there's this one thing I read that I want to bring up. So empathy, it's not limitless. It's tiring. It can be exhausting. It can drain you. Jayton, earlier you talked about like a bucket of empathy to pull out of. You need to give yourself time for that bucket to refill. And the statement I want to read is, empathy, it doesn't come naturally. It's a psychological and emotional investment to get into the mind and experience of another person and respond with compassion rather than indifference. That takes physical, mental, and emotional energy, and we can't do that all the time. And so sometimes, should we have empathy for the sympathizer? I mean, maybe they're not in a place to respond with empathy for whatever's going on in their world.
I actually wrote something down about that, so we can talk about it later. But that is
like,
perfect.
oh, we should go. I empathize with you, sympathizer, because you're just exhausted. Being so empathetic all the time.
Your bucket must be low. I got you. Refill that bucket before you go empathizing.
How strong of a person must you be if you're the one who's dealing with grief? Someone tries to sympathize with you, and you just put
turn it back
everything on
around.
hold. You're like, yeah, you're obviously an emotional idiot. So I understand that, I accept that, and I empathize with you. Now I'm gonna go back to being bummed out. Brian, can I just have my moment, please?
I certainly agree with a lot of what was said, and I think kind of what I think about is the level of connection between when you're empathizing versus sympathizing. And I like your example of that distance, and there's much more of a connection with the person when you really are taking the steps to empathize, trying to understand what they're going to, trying to be there. Whereas there's that distance, like there's a psychological distance, there's an emotional distance with sympathy, and I think that's kind of the biggest thing that I think of is when you're thinking about the two, like personally, like what am I investing in, with this situation, and so there's that distance that I think plays a big part.
So did you want to? Okay. So the things that I thought of during that was, and Eve touched on it, Nate, you touched on it as well, but I don't believe sympathy is bad. Like, I think there are certain times and places, this is what I wrote down to bring to the table, and we can discuss it and move on if you want, but, I don't believe sympathy is bad. And I think that takes awareness on our part to know when we're hoping for or needing that empathy, and we're only getting sympathy that we can't, call somebody an emotional idiot just because you can't give me empathy and you're only giving me sympathy, and I need you closer, but you're standing at a distance because you got your own things to take care of. So I want to make sure, and this is for me putting that out there, that I don't believe sympathy at certain times that is bad. Sometimes you just need to have sympathy. Sometimes you need to, protect your bucket because you're going to need that when you encounter this next situation that you already foresee coming. But is there a time and place for sympathy? Because there's so much going on in our world right now. And I say that specifically because we are experiencing and have the opportunity to have sympathy and empathy for things that are happening way beyond either our control and beyond our reach. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people get overwhelmed, because I have felt overwhelming feelings. I've felt overwhelmed recently because of not only our efforts here, but just so many things that I want to help out with, And I feel I have a big bucket of empathy, but I need to be aware of not to exhaust that bucket, and then it turns into sympathy when I really want to give empathy.
Mm-hmm. There's a great example of that. Just came to mind in y'all remember the movie The Patriot, Mel Gibson. There's a scene in there where it's very emotional. I mean, obviously the whole experience was emotional, but it was a very emotional time. A lot of close members of the militia were just killed, and the French officer was acting very emotionally, and he lashed out at Mel Gibson's character and said and referred back to the time where his wife and daughters were murdered by the English, and he just, for him, it's a very emotionally charged moment. And Mel Gibson, because he is the commander of the militia, has to remain a leader and has to stay focused. And so his only response is, with a dead face, is, "You have my sympathy, but my orders." Meaning that, yes, I acknowledge that this is very powerful for you, but I can't focus on that part right now because the bigger picture is more important. And the French officer's immediate reaction is, "Damn your sympathy," because he doesn't want that right now. He wants to be emotionally vested in this situation. And then for someone like Mel Gibson, who is the leader, who's in charge of not just the French officer's life, but everyone else in the militia, has to acknowledge but keep a distance from that emotion. I can't get emotionally invested with your experience right now because it doesn't fit with the big picture, with our end goal. And I think maybe that relates to, Jayton, what you were saying is that yes, that was correct to be sympathetic in that moment, because in order to take from his empathetic bucket would be costly for the whole group. So yes, I sympathize, but we have to focus.
Right.
Yeah.
I think sympathy is more of an immediate reaction too. When you hear about something that happened, it's more instinctual to be sympathetic. Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminds me, there's a book that I read that it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And a lot of what he talks about is in various aspects of our lives and on how our brains are. He kind of splits them into two parts, the slow thinking and fast thinking. So the fast thinking is what's instinctual. When you're driving, someone comes out in front of you, you slam on the brakes. You don't think about it, you just do it. Mm-hmm. And so when something happens in your life and or someone else's and you hear about it, something terrible, your immediate reaction is sympathetic. Whereas the slow thinking part is, how do I try to begin to understand what they're going through? How do I try to empathize with the situation? And so that's kind of, I think, I agree. There's definitely a part of, or there's space for sympathy, But kind of how I think about it, where it's more natural, is when it happens instinctually in certain situations.
Do we want to talk about any potential negative effects of empathy, or how empathy can be manipulated?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Empathy can be very problematic. There's a saying that empathy makes bad policy, or bad politics, I think is more specifically the actual saying. And I know that doesn't fully apply to us because we're not here trying to create policy. But what it basically means is that if you're in a position of power, or if you're a leader of any sorts, and someone is trying to influence you by using a personal experience, and they want you to empathize with them, where that becomes problematic is if I'm trying to empathize with your situation, yet I have to make a decision for this group. While I'm empathizing with you, I'm actually creating tunnel vision, because in doing so, I'm forgetting about everyone's best interest. Mm-hmm. So empathizing is a fine thing to do. And what I've drawn from that saying that empathy leads to bad politics is that that doesn't mean it's not very important to empathize with people you meet. But what is important is that after I'm done empathizing with you, I have to step back into myself with that new knowledge or new thought, and still make a decision from my own personality, you know. And so where people get in trouble with empathy is listening to someone's personal experience and then making a decision based solely on that because they feel emotionally tied. And some people who are more agreeable than others, once they get that emotional connection with someone, they quite often gravitate towards that because it's easier, it makes you feel better, makes you feel more compassionate, things like that. But the simple fact is that can often be detrimental. So I think it is, yes, sometimes in many cases, it can be very dangerous to be too empathetic.
Yeah, that's why city councils and legislatures and large decision-making groups, a lot of times folks will try to get tearful stories up in front, you know, let me talk about this, let me relay my experience. I think trying to solicit empathy for policy-making decisions. I mean, I go to our budget, right? I think about our national budget, $20 trillion in debt, increasing dramatically every day. For all of our experience, right? I think every aspect of the budget is arguably important. All the things that we as a nation spend money on. What about my kids? What about my grandkids? Who's going to handle this? How much suffering are we creating in the future for them? They're distant, right? It's hard to put myself in the shoes of a child 50 years from now and think about what are they going to deal with? How are they going to deal with what we're laying the groundwork for now?
And so you're suggesting that if because of the empathy that we have for each other right now and all the things that we're paying for, we're creating a mess for the folks. Yeah.
It's hard for me to say no in this moment. When you're here in front of me, relating your experience, and I'm using empathy, I'm trying to understand and put myself in your shoes, I want to make a decision to help and support you. And the people who are going to have to deal with that more so down the road, I'm not empathizing with them as much.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up a question that's coming up from some of the things that I've been hearing, and that you talked about the effect on like policy and how policy can be manipulated by empathy. And so one of the concepts that we're probably going to end up talking about too is the concept of power. And so my question for you all is how does power affect empathy?
Well, it's, having power of any kind, if you're a decent person, means that you have to make hard decisions quite a lot in order to benefit the group as a whole, with the understanding that making decisions for the group is going to hurt individual people. But if you're in charge of a group of people, you can't think always about any particular individual, because it will create that tunnel vision. That goes back to why empathy can be dangerous, and so that's why every president that we've all experienced in our lifetime has been hated by at least 50% of the population, because they have to make incredibly complex, difficult emotionally taxing decisions that we can't even fathom. But when it negatively affects us, well, they're a terrible person because they don't understand me. Well, it's not the responsibility to understand you as a person. It's the responsibility to make a judgment call based on what they feel is best for the group. Now, that doesn't always excuse some of their decisions, and I won't mention any particular president because that's not what we're discussing today. But I mean, I'm sure anybody on any side of the aisle can pick a president and either defend or demonize them for any particular decision they made because it had a direct effect on them, or they felt an emotional attack based on that decision. But anyone who has ever been a leader or had employees or have kids would understand that you can't always make the decision based on what this individual wants or feels or says that they need. Sometimes it has to be your call, and you have to make the hard choice that you know is going to upset 49% of the people you're affecting. But that 51% sometimes is more important because it's the majority. And majority means growth and survival and longevity.
Yeah, to kind of build on that too, I think even more so now with how things are portrayed in politics on both sides, whenever something in policy comes out, then you immediately have the other side, whoever has this idea or this legislation that's coming down, the other side's coming out and trying to attack it, whether it's good for their constituents or not. There's so much fighting between the parties that they're trying to empathize with their constituents in a negative, by highlighting the negative aspects of whatever is proposed. That, you know, even if something were to benefit more than 50%, you always have this fighting, and I feel like that's constantly used in politics, and the media on both sides will perpetuate that, and you have this constant back and forth where it's, you know, he said, she said, and this is bad, this is good. And so it's interesting now, like I get to a point where I have a hard time watching the news because they try to boil everything down into what's good, what's bad. You know, is this a good thing or a bad thing? It's like, these are very complicated decisions affecting millions of people. It's not cut and dry. It's not black and white. And so it's so much played about within politics about the emotional side, so that it makes it easier for someone to accept or deny. And so that's, I think, a problem with that we have as a country, is we're not able to look at things deeply in a thoughtful way and think, well, what really is best for the people?
We got a question online, and I wanted to bring it up. Jason Williams said, so how does empathy affect change? Like, because, I mean, we all understand we're not here to change anybody's mind or change a person or make a good person a better person or make a bad person a good person. I mean, we're just here to present our thoughts, our feelings, show how we use empathy in everyday life. But I think that's a really legit question that we could talk about, is we're all here saying how much we should have empathy and make sure we protect our bucket and use our bucket in the best ways and use our sympathy bucket when we have to. But how does empathy affect change? I think that it went away now. But, you know, how are we going to use empathy in order to help our community grow in a better way so we can have less of the evil and more good and more love?
My answer to that, my gut, I just feel like personal growth. If we're responsible for our own personal growth, then that is going to spider out in different directions. And so I wish there were 800 conversations like this happening in town right now, so that people were looking at themselves and having some personal growth. And then it, you know, it would just kind of just widen. I just think it would just, that is a really messy answer, but that is my gut feeling when that question is asked, how does empathy equal change? For me, trying to sit in somebody else's space and trying to understand where they're at is going to
give me personal growth, and then I could be a better person to the next person I engage with, and then all of a sudden they're a better person to the next person they engage with, and that domino, hopefully will just keep on going.
I think you're absolutely right. Jayton and I have talked about this some, that individually we can effectuate positive change, and we can have a goal of ultimately effectuating macro level change, but I as an individual can't make macro level change happen. If I wanted to do that, I would need power. And then if I use my power to impose that change, that's not having empathy for the people who, it's impossible. So yeah, 800 conversations similar to this one would be awesome. If somebody watches this and it prompts them to go have a conversation with one person, that's promoting positive change. You're right. It spider webs out and it starts to grow, and at some point it hits critical mass and it gets bigger. We are just trying to change the narrative in everyday conversation amongst people in our community.
I think a lot of people, well, to build on your comment about personal growth, I'm a strong believer in personal accountability. Looking out for yourself, but also creating a better you. And I think a lot of people have that viewpoint. But I think people who have that viewpoint of personal accountability don't spend enough time acknowledging the fact that the world is bigger than them. People, mostly conservatives who believe in personal responsibility, get lost in that narrative a little too much sometimes, and they are so blind to just what's happening to them that they refuse to acknowledge that the world is bigger than them. And it's hard to accept that the world is bigger than you, especially when you're stuck in your rabbit hole of just me and my family and me and my family, and I don't have time to listen to your problems because me and my family. That doesn't mean that you have to take on everyone else's woes, but if you're to retain your sanity for the rest of your life, you have to interact with people. If you're not going to live in a mountain in a cabin somewhere, you're going to have interactions with people every day, which means if you don't learn to practice empathy, at least on a very basic level, you're going to have a very tough time being involved in a civilization. So, and I think the first step in that is, especially if you're the type of person who believes on the firm stance of personal accountability, is yes, personal accountability, but there's more to my personal accountability than just me. There's more to me than me, and beyond me is everybody else. The end. I have to think about it. Am I done? Yeah, I'm done. Period. All right.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And this is probably a little sloppy because I don't have all the thoughts formulated. But the personal accountability is in terms of how change gets affected with empathy. It's understanding first, like you said, that the world is bigger than just you. And if you want to make a positive change for the community, it starts with, well, what does the community want? What does the community need? And I don't remember what you had said. The first thing that you had said about what empathy would change. I'm trying to.
Oh,
I wrote it down even.
Sorry,
I feel like how empathy can equal change is just that with our own personal growth, then we can touch on other people's lives, and it will be a domino effect.
Exactly, and so it starts with people who want to grow, and I think that requires understanding that what does everyone else want personally, and then how can we achieve that as a common group. And I've read some interesting articles about smaller communities that have really grown to thriving, diverse communities because they're open and really willing to try new things. And read a book recently that was talking about one example where especially with politics and being big, there's a lot of change can be slow, but with where we are as a society and how quickly technology is changing and the need for laws to keep up with that, his theory was for communities to grow and be successful is they need to change at that rapid rate that technology is, and that requires trying new things. And so it's not going to be always a successful trial, whatever it is. But well, yeah, it's like people need to buy in and find ways that have unique ways to grow as a community. I think I'm a little off track there, but that's kind of some thoughts.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think about change needing to be quick, what you're talking about, and thinking about how hard that is. Like when we're talking about interpersonal change and interpersonal growth, and I think change being quick, it almost by default makes me think I'm going to have this one conversation or interaction with this person, and I need to try to change, try to put everything out there and flip the idea or flip their perspective, or like for myself, like I need to turn 100 degrees or 180 degrees, and I just think that fundamentally change is long term and it takes a while, and so I struggle to reconcile in my head, like that makes sense in a way, because we as a society, as a culture, want things quick and things happen quick, but I don't know if true change happens quick. I don't know if it can happen.
No, and I agree that I don't think it can, especially if you're talking about a larger community, and things have been done for several decades or even generations. And that it requires a big shift in not personalities, but how people view the world and their community, and being able to, like you said, reconcile that, understand why the change is happening. So with our brains, I think that like big fundamental changes take much longer than some quick, policy change or something like that. Because if anything drastic, you're immediately going to have the negative sentiment towards it. And I don't have an answer like how do you solve that. It's an interesting.
I don't know if there is an answer.
How are we feeling on our empathy discussion?
I think we've tackled that thing.
Yeah. Do you want to just speak on how going forward, how we're hopefully going to have or had as a foundation, do we even need to? I guess I just want to make sure that
I think it's pretty clear
okay.
To anyone who's watching that obviously an underlying theme is to be empathetic, at least within our group, because it's easier to be empathetic within this room, because at the end of the day, there's not going to be any new policies, new rules, or anything amongst us. So I can take a little more time to be empathetic with you and you without worrying about making a bad decision from it, because there's no decisions to be made. So I think an underlying theme will always be exercising a little more empathy in these talks, so that we can keep the open, honest dialogue alive for as long as possible. I think empathy is a big part of that open, honest dialogue. So hopefully, with every new discussion we have as we go forward, empathy will always be the carpet that fits underneath the main topic. So like today, we're also going to be discussing white privilege. And that's a pretty touchy subject. And so empathy, it's important to put that in bold, capitalized, underlined, italic, highlighted. Well, because that puts people on the defensive almost immediately on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the color spectrum. You just say white privilege, people immediately reach for their holster. I got a verbal pistol here. I'll go down with you. And so, especially today, empathy is very important as a foundation to the conversation we're about to have, because I think it's very likely there are going to be differing viewpoints, and there's going to be some emotionally charged viewpoints. And I'm sure I know I'm emotionally invested in this group because I believe in it. So when I feel myself letting my emotions take over my opinion more than I'm willing to commit to, then I need to stop, remember that I'm speaking with people with whom I respect, with whom have different experiences than I do, and that they are just as valid as my own. That's how empathy is going to help not only this conversation, but future conversations as this group matures and moves forward.
I love that definition of empathy. People whose experiences are just as valid as my own. That's the core of human respect and decency.
Yeah.
So I'd like to share a few words that I've heard in this group as it pertains to empathy, and use that to sort of frame our transition into the concept of privilege and white privilege. Some of the words that I've heard today around empathy are connection, presence, present, ally, investment, opening up, personal, bridge building, and validation. Those are just some of the words that I've heard you all, some key words or phrases that I've
Man, I'm so glad you're here. God. Little recap.
around empathy. I enjoy being here. Thank you for having me. This is amazing. So let's take those concepts, let's take those words that we've surrounded empathy with, and let's talk about, I know that the group is wanting to dive in and tackle white privilege. It's important for me to, again, language is really important as well. So before we start defining white privilege, I think it's really important for us to be able to define and have some language around privilege as well. So just what is privilege? What is privilege for you all?
I think privilege is something that you may have access to or have the ability to, or have something that somebody does not have. That's privilege. Again, I speak from the heart. I speak from feelings and my first-hand experience, which isn't a definition for all, or I'm not trying to speak for all. I believe, and this is without me looking up the definition again, privilege is you having something that somebody else commonly does not have, or something like that. Now I'm gonna look up the definition.
And thank you for that. And as you all go through these definitions, I probably should have done this with empathy, but it's important for me to have you all sort of define privilege on your own, like in your own sort of language, just so that we understand where everyone is coming from, and so we can try to come up with a common definition of privilege, or see if there's a common definition of privilege that stands out. So, Jason, could you repeat those one more time for me? Just having things.
Yeah, you having access, or having something, or having the ability to do something which somebody else commonly would not have.
Good. Right, so I think we went this way for privilege. So for empathy. So let's go this way.
Thank you so much for joining in. You know you do not have to talk. I hope you know that, Brian.
Yeah, we'll go this way around the circle.
I agree. It's more like something where a person has an advantage of some sort. I actually don't even know the real definition of privilege, but that's kind of my first thought is having privilege or being privileged is some sort of advantage to others.
So I think it would be the ability to speak, think, or act in a way that others cannot. And I thought about adding on without fear of consequence or repercussion at the end, but I don't know, I haven't thought through enough to know if I really think that that's true. Because you can have privileges. So I'm thinking about the kids I work with who live in group homes, right? You get on a certain level, you get certain privileges. However, you can still lose those in the course of doing whatever it is you get to do. You can still behave in such a way to lose that. So I don't know if I like that end part. So I think it's you can think, speak, or act in a way that other people cannot.
Are we just talking just the definition of what we think privilege is, or are we trying to define what we think white privilege is?
Just privilege.
Just privilege.
Okay,
now.
so
We'll delve into
Okay,
it.
so the privilege is just kind of an advantage that a group or a person or whatever, however you define it, has over other people. It's just a simple kind of leg up, I guess. Yeah.
That's a very broad definition of privilege. Yeah, I think it's best to stick to the broader definition that a special right, not necessarily a fundamental right, but a special right or access, or even what's the word I'm looking for? Immunity to certain consequences and repercussions. So maybe it's not that you just have access, but you can be privileged in a way that keeps you from suffering consequences. So like in your example, well, if not that I believe you could be corrupted this way, but let's say someone paid you off to make sure that their kid didn't suffer any of those consequences from misbehaving. Okay, well, that would be a privilege in that they're immune to consequences. That's a privilege.
Or maybe less consequences. Maybe not full immunity, but maybe like a degree of consequences.
Yeah. So it's not just what you have access to, but it's also what you are protected from. The end. I don't have to do it.
You don't. I'm digesting.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to start a habit.
You can. I think it would be really, really fun if you did that though every time.
One of my favorite, a really funny comedian does that about when George Bush was president. He did a great impression, and so he suggested that maybe in order for all of us to know when George Bush was done with the thought, he should end it with the end. Just so you know he wasn't going to keep going.
Yeah, I'm just digesting why I use that. There's a lot there. I really think privilege, the definition of privilege is just a leg up. Let's keep it simple. I think it is simple.
I hope you don't mind, but you said something that a couple other people have said, and it pinged me a little bit. I don't think it's fair to say that it's just a leg up, because a privilege can be something very, very basic. So let's see. Everyone in an established community has access to education, to public education. Okay, but education is not necessarily a right. Education is a privilege, and so on a very basic level with basic education, no one has a leg up on anyone else.
They have a leg up on other countries that don't have access to education.
Different school districts have privileges over other school districts.
Okay, yes, we can expand on it. Okay, but I'm not saying that this is just a very concrete example. This is just one example in that it's not just having a leg up on somebody else. Okay, but it is something that is not endowed to you by your creator. Mm-hmm. Okay, we all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so then perhaps everything outside of that, not everything, but many things outside of that is a privilege, which doesn't necessarily mean we have it over somebody else.
Those are privileges.
Yeah, those are
that
privileges.
we have just because we happen to be born here.
Well, we as a country have decided that those are fundamental rights.
Right. So just being able to sit here having this conversation, we're privileged in being able to do that.
Sure.
Because we live in a society that allows that. We could live in so we do have a leg up that we can have this conversation. In other societies, they're not allowed to gather and have those conversations.
We compare with the rest of the world, yes, but that doesn't.
I think we're fighting over, or not even fighting. I think we're trying to discuss leg up versus.
Well, yeah,
so I don't want to.
It's just that I heard your leg up comment in a couple of the different people's definitions, and I wanted to point out that it's maybe not healthy to make that the only basis of your definition.
Go ahead.
I just want to, so what just struck me when you were talking about like the fundamental right, I think that in this moment, culturally, that's the fundamental right. 100 years ago, I think it would have been us three white dudes sitting here having this conversation about fundamental rights, and nobody else would be here. Because 100 years ago, that was not a fundamental right for every human being in this country. It was a fundamental right for us.
Yeah, maybe I misspoke. Maybe I didn't really convey my ideas. I definitely went off the trigger on that idea because it was an impulse to speak on what y'all said. So maybe I didn't think it all the way through.
I kind of understand what you're saying, and I'm sure you've heard this throughout your athletic career. It's a privilege to be on this team, and like for the word in argument's sake, is it? You worked hard to make the team to start. And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's not it.
Please finish your thought.
Yeah, and so I think like, is it a true privilege or is it an earned spot that you made and playing sports as well? Like,
I think many privileges are earned.
I was just gonna say that I think
Many.
privileges can,
be earned.
and I would say most privileges should be earned.
Yeah, absolutely.
If not all of them, I'm pretty sure we can make a case for some privilege out there should just be your right or whatever. But I mean, I would say privileges should be earned, and there are certain privileges that I would beg to say must be earned before you
Yeah.
even get it.
Yeah, and so
But I get what you're saying.
yeah, and I think that might be an important thing, at least that I'm thinking of when we continue this conversation, is thinking about earned versus unearned privileges.
Sure.
And how that fits in the context of things.
Yeah.
And I would just like to add, absolutely, my definition is simplified.
Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Okay.
I will give you that.
Yeah.
So let's focus on earned versus unearned privileges, and to get right into our topic, looking specifically at white privilege. Your race, your ethnicity is something that you were born into. Rachel Dose, notwithstanding. I should have said that on mine. But whatever, I'll throw some shit. But so when we think about unearned privileges, particularly privileges granted or by race, let's look at the concept of white privilege. So what is white privilege? And
there's the online was blowing up a little bit about this. So I do want to go ahead and state this right now is our topic we have chosen to discuss is empathy and specifically white privilege. We just defined that privilege can span to every race, every ethnicity, every culture, everywhere. There is some privilege out there. If you're alive, you're privileged to be alive, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
So when we are talking about white privilege, that does not mean that there are no other privileges out there. And there's a question on here is that, why are we talking about white privilege? Is there no black privilege? So I just want to make sure we put that out there. I'm very anxious to talk about this topic, specifically white privilege. We're here now, yay. But I just want to go ahead and lay that out there right now. I am not saying that there is only white privilege and that there is no other privilege out there. That's just putting it out there.
So let me interject with one thing, like really quickly. So we've made a conscious effort to focus on the concept of race and white privilege. Okay. So why? I guess I'll revise my question before we define it. Why white privilege? What is it about white privilege that makes us have this conversation?
Such a popular buzzword.
I wouldn't only say that. I would say just because there are more white people in this country and more white people that are that have the most impact, and that impact is made it aware so that white privilege is a topic.
That buzzword alone is sparking. I don't see the phrase white privilege sparking a whole lot of good. I see it sparking a whole lot of anger and even some violence and some misinformation and I think it's spreading some ignorance amongst everybody. And so that's why, as of right now, I've settled on the notion that the idea of white privilege just needs to be undone and done away with, because it's not helping anything to perpetuate this notion of white privilege. Of course, whites are privileged. We all have privileges of all sorts, and I think it's very important to not only acknowledge that we're privileged in our own way, but also to work to deserve them. And because if we're going to work to deserve them, that means we can't be ashamed of them. And unfortunately, the way white privilege is being tossed around the social media and mainstream media horn is that it's inherently a bad thing. You know, I don't hear it. You know, privilege is not a bad thing. Okay, especially if you've worked hard to deserve it. But white privilege is being used as a guilt, as a simplistic guilt, and I don't see it. I don't see it being productive to simplistically criminalize an entire ethnic group, regardless of any individual's guilt or innocence. By definition, that is racism. You simplistically criminalize anybody of any skin color of a collective crime, regardless of what they've done, to be a part of that phrase. That's making a judgment call based on the ethnic group they belong to.
I don't think
without taking into account their personal action.
I don't think the original intent was to individualize it at all.
I don't think so at all.
It's been misappropriated and misused, and that is detrimental to the conversation in and of itself.
Right, which is why white privilege. I mean, we're only talking about white privilege on mainstream media. It's only white privilege that's being discussed, especially being discussed in a negative light. So if we're going to have positive change, we've got to stop highlighting the white. Let's acknowledge that there is privilege amongst all of us, and yes, we have it, and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's advantageous, sometimes it makes someone disadvantaged. But I don't see us changing. Of course, it wasn't intended to be a negative thing, but that's what it is. That's what it's turned into, and I don't see us turning it back into what it was originally intended to be.
Why not?
So hold on, let's hear some more thoughts about white privilege in particular.
So to me, when I first heard the definition of white privilege, you're saying that it was once positive?
No, I don't think it was meant to be.
You just said that you want to change it back to being positive.
No, I don't think it can be changed back to being a positive thing. I think when white privilege first came out as a buzzword, it wasn't intended to demonize any particular group of people, but because people are emotionally charged, that's how people took it. And you can use that explanation for a multitude of things. Black Lives Matter. Yeah, was it intended to be this controversial group or idea or topic? But that's how.
But you didn't answer the question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
You used the specific phrase that we can't change it back to being good. So therefore, you're implying that it was once a good term.
I think it had good intentions.
Okay. I was just wondering about that. So for me, when it comes, since we're discussing white privilege, why it is such a hot button topic is, in the vast majority of American history, there was systematic white privilege. There were laws in place that gave white people power, gave white people a leg up. Like the woman in the 1920s, the woman who championed women's suffrage and allowed women to vote. She got women to vote, but on the flip side, she did not think black women were human beings. She did not think black men were human beings. Mm-hmm. So she did champion this ability for women to vote, but she also did not think that black people should be able to vote either. So that was her white privilege kind of fighting, and not just like that, but like everywhere. Like Native Americans are my people. We were the last group of ethnicities to be given American citizenship. Black people had to fight for their citizenship, had to fight to not be slaves. Like in history, and why it's such a hot button topic is simply that minorities are trying to fight back against that systematic power that was once there. And since civil rights era, it's not necessarily law anymore, but people can still feel that white people are getting privileges from the remnants of that systematic power.
Yes, and I won't deny what you just said, because it's historically accurate. And I think if you have any sense at all, you have to acknowledge that yes, whites have been privileged and whites still are privileged. But that's not my argument. My argument, yes, of course, whites are privileged. All people of all races, of all walks of life have their own individual privileges. And I'm not saying some are better than others. But what I'm saying is that to call out, we can't fix where we come from. We can't fix Jim Crow law. Well, we did fix Jim Crow laws. We got rid of them. Okay, that's as good as you can do with something like Jim Crow laws. You get rid of them. but we can't make the fact that they happen change. Okay, so if we're going to move forward, okay, you have to stop simplistically categorizing an entire race of people. I thought that's the whole point of ending racism, is to stop putting a blanket of stereotypes over you because you have darker skin than me. That's an inherently ignorant thing to do.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sorry, but I have a skin color, just like you have a skin color, and to assume your character based on what I see physically is very ignorant.
That's not.
Let's hear some more thoughts on. Let's hear some more thoughts on white privilege and why it's important. Why it's an important concept from a few of the folks that haven't had a chance to share those yet before we start diving.
So I think that is the fundamental issue. Is I don't think the term white privilege is about a person or a group of people. I think it's about. So I mean, when I read that type stuff up, right? So I don't have quotes for everything, but a lot of the stuff I poached off the internet, and I just read other people's stuff. It's really good. So white privilege is not something that white people do, create, or enjoy on purpose. When you talk about privilege as like an immunity, white privilege creates an immunity from a lot of the challenges that other people have. And so I think that when white people hear that as an attack on me as a person or us as a group, it's not about that. It's about the societal structure we live in and what the differential treatment of people in different situations based off of skin color. I think that's all it is.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it is, I think that's, we get up in arms. I've gotten up in arms for my people because I feel like, who's attacking me? Like, why am I being attacked as a person? And I have to take a step back and be like, well, it's not about me, and nobody's attacking me necessarily. And if they are, then I think it's important we sit down and have a talk about, okay, so that's when we get into, like, what have I done specifically? And hopefully we can navigate that and see that I haven't done anything, but I am, a lot of times I think it's, as a white male, it's sort of imposed on us, like, you are a physical manifestation of all of this privilege. And I don't think that's true, and I don't think that is a productive direction to go.
I think that's exactly what it's turned into is a derogatory term. It's used as a silencer a lot of times, and I don't think that's what it was intended to be. But too many people, and too many people who have a large influence over many others, are using it as a silencer. You're white, therefore you aren't as victimized, you aren't as marginalized, you aren't as informed, or your opinion isn't as valuable, therefore shut up. Now, that's not what everyone feels when they use the term white privilege. I know that, but I think too much of that use as a silencer is being tossed around, and it needs to stop because that's very dangerous, and that can spin out of control very rapidly.
So what you're saying is that because you're white, people have marginalized your opinion because you're white.
Well, when I'm speaking to certain topics,
Yes.
like, as a human being, I feel that I'm qualified to discuss any topic I've developed an opinion on, even topics about minorities. Okay, I've gathered information. I've read as much as I can read. I've formed my own opinion, and it's just as valid as anyone else's. We've already established that when we talk about empathy. Okay, but on not too often, but on several occasions, people have implicated that my opinion doesn't count as much because I'm not that.
Okay, I'd like to respond to that if I can.
Yeah, sure, please.
I think maybe that is how it's coming across. I don't think that that's necessarily, I mean, I think the crux of the situation there is you've had your time to talk. You've had your time to talk.
What do you mean?
White men have had their time to talk. And so this whole white privilege thing is coming, and especially because it's time for other opinions to be presented. It's time for other people. It's not, you said something about just shut up, you're white, you don't really know. That I might come across like that, but I think it's more, just give the space for other people to present. So they're bringing it in as white privilege when it really is the pendulum swinging. So we can start talking about, so that white people on CNN aren't standing there talking about Native issues or maybe women's issues or Black issues or whatever. Let's bring in somebody that represents that particular group. So I think it's not so much that they want you to shut up because you're white, but they just think, okay, we've heard from y'all, we've got it.
I would ask you to examine what you just said, because what you just said is you've had your time to talk, and I asked you, what do you mean by that?
Like
you
over
say,
the course of history.
Fine, but you're putting a blanket on this is why people feel personally attacked. You, white male, you've had your time to talk. White men have had their time to talk. You can't say that and not expect individual white males to feel personally attacked.
Oh, I get it.
This is as much spotlight as I've ever had in my life. So no, I don't feel I've had my time to talk.
Sure.
And
not on a personal, right?
Well, not on a public level. I haven't had access to all of Facebook before. Well, I mean, I have, but I don't take advantage of it because I'm not the type to post videos to social media. And
obviously, I didn't mean you specifically.
Right. I know you didn't. But I asked you to examine what you said.
Sure.
White men have had their time to talk. Yes, whites have been privileged.
So let me interject here.
Okay.
One of the things that I am hearing is that white privilege is an issue because the concept of white racial identity is being examined. Right? And so when we often think of power and privilege, one of the things about privileges and power is the fact that you are able to enjoy advantages. You're able to enjoy advantages that other people typically don't know about. So what I'm pulling from some of your responses is that we're talking about white privilege now because it's time to examine the privileges that are associated with being white that haven't been examined before. Eden, you mentioned it not being a personal reflection of any individual white male, and that's what I'm hearing from you as well, Nate. But when we're talking about white privilege, we're talking about it because it's systemic. We're addressing systemic issues, and that's where that concept of empathy that we mentioned before about decisions about the individual affecting the group. So if I'm taking some of our previous conversation before, it sounds as though the group is talking about the fact that it's time to start building empathy across racial lines as it pertains to white privilege. So when we think about the systemic impact of being white and its effect on privilege, a couple of questions really come to mind for me, and a couple of them you all have posed. So let me go to Eden's question about what do we think we can do to build empathy across racial lines in order to start breaking down some issues that we're having with privilege, with the concept of privilege. How do empathy and privilege relate to each other?
I think acknowledging that the privilege exists is, I don't necessarily think that white privilege was meant to criminalize anyone, but I think there's this desire for it to be acknowledged. Just to acknowledge it, I think, would be a huge step in the right direction. But if we could acknowledge that, yes, it's a part of our history, and maybe it would take some of that negativity out of it. If we just acknowledge the truth of it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's hard to do that question, how do you show that empathy? Because it is not, when you ask that question, you can't really I don't think you can really direct that at minorities, because like myself, I've had to live my entire life empathetically. Like the vast majority of my life is I am the minority, regardless of the situation. Like when I'm around other natives, I'm no longer the minority, but where I work, vast majority, there's like 3 other native people in like 100+ person company. I just spend my entire work time amongst other white people. I went to school. I got lucky in that I lived in the city, but so like there were more natives, but again, the school was the vast majority of white. My high school, there was like 10 natives. And when I went to college, I was one of like 30 in a 20,000 population college. Like when you ask that question, I've lived my entire life being empathetic towards other peoples, other cultures, other races. It's not up to me to kind of fix that issue. It's like she said, we're simply asking white people to acknowledge, yeah, there are a lot of privilege advantages you get by being white. Like a good example, when I was a little kid, I was helping my dad. He worked at the Rhapsody Club for Boys, and they were putting on a carnival. So we went to Target, and we bought like 10 cartfuls worth of like little toys and candies. So when they were ringing up the toys, they would ring it up and just throw it back into the cart. And then once that one cart was done, they pushed it forward until they got like all 10 carts, no bags. They just threw them, just ringed them up, threw it in there. So then 10 people, we start walking out in the line. I was the last person in line. All 9 carts got through the line, or got outside just fine. They stopped me. I was the only non-white person in the group. And the workers were like, can I see your receipt, please? Like, why do you have all this stuff? And I'm like, did you not just see the 9 other people walk in front of me? Like, did you not just see that? And they were like, we need to see your receipt before we can let you leave Target. So the other people got out to the car and they were like, where's Richard at? So they walked back in and they were like, what's going on? And the workers were like, well, we can't let him leave because we think he stole these items. And
They actually said they actually accused you of stealing?
Yeah.
Wow.
And my dad, who is like, I have 2 dads. I have my biological father, then I have another man who helped raise me. He's white. And he was pissed off. So he went and got the other 9 carts, walked back into the Target, said, here's a receipt, checked every single thing, make sure nothing's stolen. And the manager was like, kind of like nervous, but flat out like, I don't know if you guys ever had situations where like that, but like things like that happen a lot to minorities. And that is the privilege of white privilege. You can go through your life not having to, even going into stores. I'll go into stores, I'll keep my hands raised up. I'll keep them in between my hands. I won't get too close to things because I know that if I look at the candy bar too closely, the person would be like, why are you still in that candy bar? Like I'm super nice, like around like people. I try to be very, like I try to smile. I try to like not be threatening because I have in my life, you know, I walk around with a hoodie and I walk like this. People are going to be like, why is he dangerous? By simply being sort of dangerous looking.
I don't think it's a good idea to always assume that type of suspicion is always racially based.
And it's not.
That sign that you see at a convenience store that says, please remove your hoodies, please remove your hat, please leave your backpack at the counter. You know why they do that? It's because people, regardless of race, who wear hoodies and backpacks have shown to be more likely to steal. So how do we solve that? Well, if you have a backpack, you do it here. Now, and Sunita, you want to say something?
Yeah, let's put the go ahead.
Give it to you.
We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Part of this
I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Okay, I guess like kind of hearing about that and like growing up in my household, it's kind of like you're taught because of these situations that you have to do that you have to be on guard a lot of the time, like going out into the public, like either going into stores, like or like even in school, just kind of being out in the community. With you being a minority, you have to be on guard because you're always thinking that people are looking at you and thinking that you're going to do something bad because of the fact that that's the, I guess that's how minorities are kind of looked upon.
Well, do you mind if I ask, do you really think that
See, and that's what,
well, I want to know what your real thoughts are.
See,
Do you think that maybe it's common for black people to be viewed as potential criminals more than white people?
And see, yeah.
So I mean, do you really think do you really believe that most non-black people who see you automatically make racially based judgments on you?
And that's where I was gonna go with that.
Okay, yeah,
Because of
I'm
the fact
curious.
that me being the person that I am, there's that part of me that kind of thinks that way because that's what I've been taught,
Mhm.
and that's what people kind of make you feel like. But then there's that other part where you can't automatically assume that everyone that you can't put everyone in the same group, because not every, like, I have a lot of white friends, and you have to realize that not everyone thinks the same way as everyone else. You
Yeah.
can't put everyone in the same spot just because a certain group of black people are thugs and stuff. You can't think that every black person is a thug and they're coming to steal everything from you.
I want to say one thing on that, and I know I've been talking a lot, so after this I'll yield to the floor for a while. But yes, you're absolutely right to think that, and this goes back to when we were establishing empathy, is that it's understanding that the world goes beyond you and your own personal world. So yes, I can empathize with you on that very specific situation you had. It must have been very insulting and frustrating to have to deal with, and I'm sure you've dealt with that more than once. But to assume that that's how the world sees you, it's not doing you any favors. I don't see you growing from that mindset, and I honestly don't believe it's true. And when you have that mindset and you express it, forgive me, but you end up getting emotional reactions from people who don't see that, especially within themselves. So yes, I'm very glad that you made that point, because I think it's very important that all of us, including white people, acknowledge their own privilege, acknowledge that the world is bigger than them, and that it's not all encompassing based on one experience. This experience, they're profound, and they have an effect on us, and they should have an effect on us. But we need to expand our thinking beyond these isolated incidents, because they can break us down as human beings, and they can destroy us, and that's not good for anybody.
Destroy friendships.
Well, they can destroy the world around us because it affects the way we interact with everybody.
1 second, everyone. Let me. I have to call attention to something. It's my role as facilitator, and so forgive me if I'm stepping on any toes. But we have been talking about white privilege for the past 20 minutes, and it's mostly been Nate talking.
Yeah.
So, there's no gentle way for me to do that. And again, it's not a personal attack on you.
Thank you.
But often this is what is happening here is systematic, right? So like this conversation that we're having right now, what happens in a circle, is probably happening in other circles as well. It's happening on larger scales. And that's one of the reasons why talking about white privilege is so important, because we're talking about the concept of privileges that other people have not been able to enjoy, people wanting an opportunity to exercise their voice, and bringing attention to the fact that a group of people has systemically oppressed other groups of people. And as we're asking them to take a step back, take a look at that and examine it, that space is being filled with pushback.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to bring attention to the fact that it's happening here as well.
I wish there was a better name for it.
I'll get to that later. Go ahead.
But I just wanted to say, because like you just bring back some things you were saying is that was like an isolated incident for myself. But at what point do those isolated incidences become an example of those privileges? Yeah, that just happened to me, but what's to say that doesn't happen to a lot of different minorities throughout their lifetimes? And you shouldn't take these small instances and just broadly brush all peoples, whatever it is, say like, because I was profiled there, that all white people are like that. That was just one incident, and it doesn't happen every day of my life, but it does happen, and it's happened enough repeatedly to where I do now make sure when I'm in stores, I do keep my hands up, or I do not try to get too close to things. At that point, that's where we're saying it is systematic, and it is not overt all the time. Like it's not like we're, you know, always constantly getting checked to make sure we're not stolen. But you can tell like when the one worker for some reason is always in the same aisle cleaning something that you're in. And it's hard because like with white privilege is when doing this, I didn't do a whole lot of research because I know when I do things like this, I normally do a lot of research and I have a lot of numbers. But the problem with like white privilege or tall man privilege or male privilege is there are statistics that prove it, but it's the personal thing. It is an emotional thing. And part of your, like, you know, if we're going to say it is white privilege, part of the white privilege is you do need to listen and be empathetic and not just shoo away saying, oh, well, that was just an isolated incident and that not all white people are like that. Because not all white people are like that. I have a lot of white friends. I have a lot of black friends. I have a lot of Native friends. I have a lot of friends of different races, and they all have different personalities. They all act differently. And I guess it's hard because it is hard because it's like I can't go and like document every single time I see a person following me, or I can't document getting pulled over and was actually speeding and I get pulled over because, you know, if I was going 100, if it's 100 miles an hour and I go 101, I was technically speeding. But does every person who drives 101 miles per hour get pulled over for speeding every single time, or is it there's some other circumstance?
Can I do another group point out, and then I'll let you go ahead. And again, this is like I'm attempting to like take heat off of Nate. I would need you to know like I'm not coming at you like personally.
I didn't feel attacked at all. I knew I was talking a little too much.
But again, so one of the things that we hear very often is like, you know, it's not me, right? Like I'm not doing it, right? And so like just take a look around the room, right? As we think about this conversation that we've had around white privilege, we've got 3 white dudes, right? And 2 of them haven't said much about it, right? And so when we think about that, it's not me. Statistically, you are absolutely right. Like statistically speaking, you are absolutely right. 2 out of the 3 white people in this room are sort of like listening and like paying attention to like what's going on. Not saying that you're not paying attention at all, but 1/3 of that person took up a lot more than 2/3 of the time, right? And so that's one of the things that we're attempting to point out in that dynamic. So go ahead.
So going back to white privilege in general is not something you give, it's something society gives you. And so I want to give an example of white privilege, me being the beneficiary of white privilege. So I used to be a juvenile probation officer in Orlando, Florida, and I worked part of the area I covered was downtown Orlando, which is predominantly minorities who reside there, high crime area, high drug trafficking. I was out there, I had to go find a kid at his house. And so I'm driving in the car and there's no addresses. So I'm just like looking, I'm driving really slow and I'm looking at addresses, looking at houses, and I'm backing up. And Orlando Police Department cruiser comes to me, rolls up, rolls his window down. What are you doing? So didn't even think, right? Reach for my badge in my pocket. Oh, let me pull my badge out. I guarantee that you all would not have reached down like that, grabbing for something.
No.
Didn't even cross my mind. And you know what? Officer didn't blink. Nothing happened. Waited for me to pull my badge out. That's benefiting from white privilege. And I didn't even have to think. I didn't think twice about reaching underneath to grab something.
How long ago was that? How long ago was that?
2009?
Would you still do the same thing today?
No.
Why not?
You know, why not?
We can come back to that, but I think that's a really, really important thing right now because that's an isolated incident.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the privilege behind that and the thought behind that, and you just knowing that you can do that because you have immunity from worrying about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to get back to right now, today, would you do the same thing, given, granted, the information that you know now and other experiences you've been exposed to? Brian, I'm really interested in what you have to say about this because I think we're on the same thought of how can we either change the term or maybe something else you want to talk about. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking a lot in terms of the word privilege. And I think part of what sparks so much debate is people perceive it differently being on different sides, and I can see how they're perceived as privileges to white people, and the fact is they shouldn't be privileges. There should be fundamental rights that everyone has, and to be able to drive your car without being freaked out anytime a cop comes. Like I know that feeling whenever I see sirens, because when there's behind me, but I can't imagine what it'd be like driving and just seeing a police officer and thinking, oh, is this guy going to pull me over with lights or not? And so it's really the privilege part. I think is the misnomer. It just comes down to racial bias, both known and unknown, and not just oversimplify things. But I can't. It's hard for me to know exactly how it is, but like for Richard, like thanks for telling your story. Like there are certain things like I know that I've experienced and read about, and when events happen like that, when you're in the store, it shapes how you go about your life. And there's different level of traumatizing events that happen, and even though it's small, I can't imagine like going through a checkout and thinking, oh, is this guy gonna think I stole all this stuff? And so knowing that those type of events happen for many people in this country on a weekly basis, maybe even daily basis, is like part of how we need to start recognizing that. And really that's how we build is first recognizing that this still happens today. And even though we may not think about that ourselves and we don't have those biases ourselves, we need to acknowledge that they still exist and start to find ways to bring our community together to reduce those. So that's kind of the thought that I had.
I wanted to circle back. I think it's really big to look at your story and how you quickly grabbed for your badge. It was intuitive to you that there was no reason not to, and so it's like that is by definition what the white privilege is for me. And so without somebody really looking hard in the mirror and really thinking about those things, without them being called out as it being white privilege, it could go missed. It could be completely missed. So I think it is important that the white privilege conversation is happening, and yeah, it's pissing a lot of people off because it's a terrible terminology. But it is kind of forcing people to look at that and to look at some things that are intuitive and just givens in their life. And oh, that isn't a given in somebody else's life. That isn't just how it is for some people. And to like I said before, just acknowledge that it is different for other people.
I think like I have another example of that too, where it's and like I was reading, like I'm really into basketball, so it's a big thing with me, like pick up basketball coaching, whatever. So there's this article of this kid, he's white, he's from Florida, and he moved to New York City. This was like in 2012, and I can't remember when I read the article, but I actually looked it up. That's one part reminded me. So this kid, he moved to New York City, and the whole idea kind of behind it was he was going to go and play pickup basketball in all of the boroughs and wherever he could go. So he started off in Brooklyn, and like for basketball in general, regardless of your race, and it's hard to kind of break into pickup basketball because we're very like, I don't know who you are, you probably suck. I don't want to waste my time.
I don't know who he is.
Yeah, like I don't know who you are. So like he had a hard time breaking in, just playing like like no one would want him to play on his team because no one knew who he was. He had no one to vouch for him, like he could actually play. So after he finally started breaking in and people let him play, he started talking to these black guys. And they started telling him, oh yeah, you can go play here, you can go play here, these are the times you can go play here. So then his question was like, okay, well what about the Bronx and the Queens? Like, when you pick up games in Bronx and Queens, and the black guy's like, no, we can't go there. Like, we're not allowed to go there. Like, I'll probably get jumped if I go there. And he came to a realization, and they told him too, they were like, no, you're cool, you can go and play there, you're fine, you're white, no one will mess with you there. But if we go to those places, it probably won't be the same treatment for us. And that just simply like he realized that, and then it had nothing to do with white privilege, but he in that article wrote, I didn't realize that I had the freedom of movement to go play anywhere I want in New York City without being attacked. And someone still may attack him just because they want to steal from him, but he kind of has that freedom of movement to go around to other places and not have to worry about getting attacked or being bullied or getting jumped. And like, even like for myself, like, you know, natives, I can go to a reservation, I'm Lakota, I can go to a Crow reservation and maybe not like me because I'm Lakota. I could go to, a good example is the Salish and the Blackfeet. Like a lot of Blackfeet can go down to like Salish country, which is a Pablo Coast-Onan, and the Salish don't really like them. And they'll start fights with them, and they'll say things to them simply from the fact that they're both Native American, they're both indigenous, but they come from different nations. Like, we don't see each other as the same. Like, I'm Lakota, and you're Blackfeet, and that is just as difference between me being Lakota and you being white. And that happens even in the small little situation.
That's a
like,
whole other topic,
horrible.
but that's what trips me out in my mind
Yeah.
on how I was raised with gangs. Like, we fight each other.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So sad.
it
It's really sad.
And that concept that you all are talking about is just like marginalized and oppression, you know, and those are effects of historical trauma and effects of systemic oppression.
I did want to circle back, way back, on one of the things that you said, Richard, and this is just some extra encouragement for you. And you know me, I mean, at least for a year now, maybe?
Yeah.
More than that, actually. But I don't feel that we should ever have to say, or we should ever feel that we've given enough empathy.
Yeah.
And maybe it was just a misspoke or misspeak on your part, but that hit me just because I don't believe that, man.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think that, no. I mean, even if you are white and privileged and you take advantage of your privilege, and you're just now coming to the realization that you're taking advantage of it, and you need to be more aware of that and offer more balance in your life. It doesn't stop. You can't just go through the rest of your life saying that, oh, I've done my enough, and when I retire, screw everybody and screw the world.
Yeah.
I've given enough empathy.
Yeah.
Because I'm with you, man.
That wasn't my. I think
I figured that, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out there because you're right, man. As a minority, growing up in America, growing up in society or environments and culture and neighborhoods that is systematically oppressive to you, every day I have to devote pure energy, time, and effort to how I'm going to make sure I am not that I'm getting the fair shake, that I'm offered the same amount of opportunity as the next ethnicity, or I would say the majority. So I just wanted to make sure I put that out there, that we can continue that. Us as a group, I'm challenging you to continue, and I know that that was just a mistake, but and the same that I want from you all. Continue to challenge me to be empathetic. Continue to challenge me to be able to have my personal growth. Continue to challenge me that I am not just flying off the cuff or speaking so emotionally that I'm addressing it as a blanket statement. So.
Can I ask a question real quick? Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
going
Go
to do a
ahead.
time check as we do. It's 10:52.
Just not a good time of the day.
I know.
It's not. So
Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you guys because you had to call me. I was having an empathy crisis a couple weeks ago or last week. I was not feeling empathetic towards people that had not shown empathy to my child. I was mad. I was mama bear mode, and I was feeling like empathy equaled tolerance, and I was really struggling with it. And you called me back in, and I shook it off, but I was really having a hard time there. I was like, no, I'm done. I don't want to be empathy. I don't want to empathize with ignorant people anymore. I'm over it. But I can't, and I can't go there. I can't stay there. I can land there occasionally because there are ignorant things that happen to us, and there are ignorant things that are happening to our babies. And frustrating, it's mind blowing. And so to come back and to be able to rest again in empathy and to hold on strong to people like you guys are like, okay, I'm losing that ability right now. You know, I think we do ebb and flow in our ability to have empathy and define it in different ways, and what does it mean tolerance. You know, I was kind of having a meltdown last night.
I think that's very important.